My name's Elise.
My name's Ezra.
My name is Camila.
My name is James.
My name is Rosa.
And how can a person discuss or debate a law about individual rights if not all individuals are free in particular society? Yeah. If a person is in this situation with the law, they can go to the Senate and make a bill. And that's why I put.
Okay, so I put just they can use like in-person protests or protests also through social media.
I thought because of most of the stuff that happened, specifically with Tyre Nichols, a lot of the stuff that his parents have been doing is a lot of civil debate and bringing it up to local, state, and federal government, and doing most of their action through political law work.
So, I basically put what Camila and James said. So, going to the Senate and trying to make a bill so then it can pass through the justice system. If any of it is like, what is it called? Like, if any of it's like reasonable, because sometimes when it's not, they don't want to pass anything where it doesn't go any further through the justice system. Also just protesting, because we see a lot of that happen now. There's also donating and like kind of donating to organizations that try to go through the courts to make change in laws, things like that.
So what I would say is if you're not able to like be heard in a more like in a louder way, I feel like social media is a great way to make your voice more known. Talking to other people and other organizations about the way you feel, and then with other people that correlate with your like point of view and what you want to bring to light, is other ways to like to like sorry
Dealing with human rights issues are not largely talked about in political discussion ways. So like it's not majorly brought up by certain parties, or it's not made laws about because it's deemed unimportant. Mm-hmm. So you are right that social media can be used because specifically with the Black Lives Matter movement, you wouldn't have gotten a lot of the political laws such as the George Floyd Act, which wouldn't have brought about unless people created more social awareness for it. And a huge way to do that specifically in America is with social media.
Yeah.
Oh, also getting that policeman in the court. Because none of that would have happened if no
Derek
one...
Chauvin.
Yeah, no one got upset about it.
Yeah.
Oh. Okay.
Yeah, because it was on
dude,
TV,
yeah.
and then they
He
were
wouldn't.
like,
He wasn't
yeah.
gonna get fired, or he was gonna get. He was gonna be on paid leave,
Mhm.
and then he wasn't gonna be
that's-
prosecuted.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
So it took social media to finally be like...
Because that's what the George Floyd Act
Yeah.
is trying to do, is trying to bring about like a way to where you can process police officers and hold them accountable, so they don't get to like go scot-free, basically.
Wait, so the reason they don't get like in as big as trouble usually is because of the unions, right?
It's because they don't want to prosecute each other. So the person who hurt Trayvon Martin, the 10-year-old boy, the person who killed him, he got to live a large majority of his life okay, and he even sold his gun that he shot the kid with on eBay, and he wasn't prosecuted for it, and they're now starting more civil unrest for it to get him arrested because they think it was a hate crime.
Okay.
Did you guys actually, going with this, the only time I actually saw the police get in trouble was recently when they beat up
Yes,
that black man.
yeah, I saw that
and it
too.
was black police officers that were on the job.
Tyree Nichols.
Yeah.
Was his name? And
Yeah.
they only fired them. And there's also a white police
It's-
officer with them,
yeah.
and he still kept his job.
Yeah.
It's because the solution that Minneapolis put for helping the unproportional rates of black and brown people getting hurt by the police was to hire more black and brown people instead of solving the actual training that they go through. So,
Okay.
on that topic, our next conversation topic is the connections that we found with the principles in the book. And I think going based on what specifically we're talking about in majority and individual rights has to deal with a lot of discrimination. And I think a lot of the connections that we find in the book is with how women are treated in Brave New World, and how John and I'm going to put this in quotes, the uncivilized people are treated because their complexions are different than who they are, and they're more objectified and fetishized than everyone else.
Some connections I found for Brave New World was basically for their majority rule. It's not really like a majority rule, but it's kinda is in a way. And the only reason I say kinda is kinda not, because of the conditioning that these people are put into. So right as soon as they're like in their little bottles, they're starting their conditioning, right? So these people kind of all believe the same thing, which gives it majority rule, but also it doesn't, because none of them are actually thinking about, like, it's not actually their beliefs in a way, right?
It's brought upon them.
Yeah, it's kind of just like, this is how you're conditioned to live, this is what you're going to believe in, this is what rules you're going to follow. So everyone's like, okay, this is what we're going to do, but it's like, no one's actually thinking about any of it. And you also see that the reason they don't think about it is because of the Soma bills.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, because if they're not working, they're on Soma.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, that's sad.
Going off of what Elise was saying, I feel like she's right with when she was saying that people don't really make their own decisions because they are like predestined, and their life is honestly just planned out from the beginning since they're in the bottle, and then until their life ends. So any thoughts or decisions they really make aren't really theirs because they're conditioned to believe what they believe. And I feel like in societies now that everyone has like a certain influence from society and like other people, but in Brave New World it takes it to like a whole other level. So none of these decisions that they make are really their own. They don't have their own like life, personality, or any differences that set them apart from others.
A connection that I made was different from what you guys put, because I just put something simpler. I put the majority rule that we see in our world is access to voting, and because in the book they didn't even have a system where you can vote because nobody wanted to vote. They didn't need it because nobody else had a different opinion. Everybody was on the same thing because they're all popping that Soma pill and listening to whatever they were being told.
I put there's no majority vote, so it's kind of like, but then at least kind of like talked about how it can also kind of be majority vote, but not really. But for me, it was like everyone, because everyone's conditioned to just like think the same and do the same. So I was like, okay, no one really has their individual like thinking and like feeling and stuff like that. So I was like, oh yeah, well, it's not really majority vote. It doesn't really count because everyone's like technically like, I thought that it was like, oh, everyone's just being made to think a certain way.
Well, it can be majority rule because John and
Oh,
those
yeah,
two
but-
guys, they think differently than everyone else, and they're kind of put down for thinking. I mean, like they have
Yeah.
islands where all of the people who think differently go to because the
Yeah.
majority of them don't want to talk to them. So they're sent there because the majority, the government in the scenario doesn't want them to influence the majority. So
Yeah.
I guess that's the majority way.
Yeah, that's what I was like when Elise came out. I was like, okay, yeah, I also kind of agree with her to a certain point that, but yeah, so.
With going back to what Rosa said with the to being conditioned all the way to their babies to all the way to adults. A big example of a quote you can read from the book is on chapter 2. It's very end. So it says, "Till at last the child's mind is these suggestions, and the sum of these suggestions is the child's mind, and not the child's mind only, the adult's mind too, all his life long." And then it says suggestions from the state. So that quote basically sums up the whole kind of this every suggestion that these children all the way to them when they're adults all comes straight from the state, all comes from them. Yeah.
Our last topic of discussion is trying to bring the connections that we find from the principle with what we see in everyday life. This can include anything from pop culture to court cases. And when I thought of court cases, I thought of more social human rights cases. That's kind of the first thing I come around, because it's basing what people can do differ from what everyone else can do. And the first one that I thought of was Roe v. Wade, because it's talking about how religious freedom, how the majority of how people view their own ideology based on their religion is more important than someone's right to have access to reproductive health care. Another one that I thought of was Browns versus the Board of Education, which deals with how black people couldn't get education because the Board of Education didn't want to have desegregated schools. So they're lacking the education that everyone can have based on skin color. And then the most recent one I thought of was Obergefell versus Hodges, which is the right to same-sex marriage versus religious belief. And it's saying that gay people can't get married because religious people disagree with it. And then pop culture moments that I thought of was Britney Spears' conservatorship, where her individual freedoms of doing things were all controlled by her manager and her father, and she basically couldn't do anything, and all of the stuff she made was owned by her father instead of her, even though she's the person that made it. So her human rights of being an individual were kind of taken away from her by the majority rule of her family and her managers.
Well, mine was much more simpler. I just put a real world example that it's often seen is just voting, the voting system in America. So how people just get to vote, everyone just gets to vote, and there's not really much to say about it, So yeah.
I also put voting because voting is an important part of a society, of a good society. Yeah.
So for this question, I thought of the Cesar Chavez protest, because he was an immigrant and he couldn't really get his voice out there to have people do things about the wages they were being given and the time that they weren't being allowed, the payments that they were being prohibited from. So he put himself out there along with other people that was working with him to make a change, even though he didn't have the same right as others. He wanted to make people that he was working with have better work conditions, have higher pay, better hours, so that they're not overworked, and not be punished for things that are humanly wrong for them. So that's what I would say for this discussion.
So for a connection that I made between the principle and the real world was Prop 187 of California. So this proposition basically was going to prohibit illegal immigrants from using non-emergency healthcare, public education, and other services in the state of California. So the reason I thought of this one was because it was going to violate individual rights in California. And so I saw what ended up happening was something that my mom actually participated in was people went out to protest this, and they went out into the streets and they all said "Si se puede," which was a big thing around that time when you'd see like Hispanic people or Latino people protest. They'd say that. So it was basically these people trying to not have, well, my mom would say kind of like their friends, because they had a lot of friends who were immigrants, like keeping them out of these things that are needed, like non-emergency health care, public education, and it would violate all these rights that these people would have living in California. It would take away all of these things. So I think that was one that I could connect to the real world and this principle.
The last thing that I thought of that made me think of it when Elise and Rosa were talking was a really good example that I'm personally involved in is anti-trans laws and acts, which are brought up in majority of conservative states, such as Florida, Alabama, and most of the South, where they're trying to strip trans people of access to health care, gender-affirming surgeries, HRT, which if you guys don't know, that's hormone replacement therapy, and as well as trying to get trans people to go to what is illegal in most U.S. states, which is conversion camps, and they're trying to get trans people to go into programs that would basically be like conversion camps, which are, I think, if I'm correct, are outlawed in either most states or are outlawed federally because they're deemed as child abuse. And so that is a case where I find that majority rule, and specifically the majority rule in this case is conservative Christians and Catholics versus individual people's rights such as me. So, yeah.
Thank you for listening.